Hello everyone, today we're looking at the 100-year evolution of the car in Gran Turismo 7, going from the 1920s all the way to the 2020s. Let's get into it. So starting in the 1920s was the only 1920s car in Gran Turismo 7, the Mercedes-Benz S-Bark Tourer from 1929. So this car is actually designed by Porsche and is a very large car, and the key factor in the 1920s was that cars were mainly reserved for the elite of the elites. This car has a 6.8 litre inline-six with a supercharger of only 177 horsepower though, but still a massive car physically, and it's a good car to kind of benchmark for the up and coming years. Okay, so jumping forward about 10 years to the Alfa Romeo 8C Touring Berlinetta, quite a long name. So the key features of the 1930s, you can see here, the cars had a more complete bodywork and they're starting to resemble the kind of modern car. Now the Mercedes was 6.8 litres, the Alfa Romeo only 2.9. Same in the count, but the power was actually more in the Alfa Romeo, so cars are becoming a lot more efficient. Aerodynamics are starting to improve as top speeds reach nearly 130 miles an hour in this car. But you do have to pay a price, 20 million, the maximum amount of credits you can spend on a car in the game. But definitely showing a slight transition from the previous 1920s cars. Okay, now moving on to the 1940s. So unfortunately, because of the war, car production was mainly halted, so there was very little commercial cars being made. I've spoken about the VW vehicles in a previous video, go and check it out. But in GT7, the only car we have is the Williams Jeep. I mean, it's not a bad car, 2.2 litre inline-four, 60 horsepower, relatively lightweight, but obviously not very fast. It wasn't really built for that. But I guess it shows that cars were now being built for other purposes rather than just for kind of the elite of the elites. Okay, so now moving on to the 1950s. So car production had basically restarted, and the cars in this kind of era all kind of resembled the same kind of formula. There's these race cars with very low displacements, with very high cylinder counts. Now I think a car that best reflects the kind of 1950s is this Ferrari 500 Non-Leal Coupe. The 2 litre inline-four, nothing special, but 168 horsepower. So we're seeing a 2 litre inline-four producing as much power as a 6.8 litre inline-six that was in the Mercedes-Benz from nearly 30 years ago. Really like those 720 kg, and because of this it was actually pretty fast, top speed 144 miles an hour. So aerodynamics are really starting to improve here. Okay, so next car we have is the Mini Cooper S. Now the reason why this car is so special is because this is the beginning of the kind of cars for the people. So for this we kind of did have the idea of the cars for people, like the Fiat 500, 6.2CV, things like that. But they were so underpowered that they couldn't really be used for much. Whereas this Mini Cooper came along, specifically the Mini Cooper S, and had around 64-65 brake horsepower, and as you can see by the livery once again, this car is also pretty competitive. Really lightweight, around 600 kg. I mean, even now, 65 brake horsepower, 600 kg is pretty fast. We can think back in the 60s. This is incredible, and this is able to keep up with around the track with many of the American alternatives with maybe like 6 times horsepower, sometimes even more. Of course, it had the classic front engine, front wheel drive layout, which helped save space, and it was one of the main first front engine, front wheel drive cars. So it's definitely revolutionary in that front as well. It's pretty fast as well. I mean, you can see here I've got to around 85 miles an hour here, uphill on the Nürburgring, which isn't too bad. I mean, nothing crazy by today's standards, but you've got to think back in the day. It sounds alright too, I guess. But it does kind of struggle at the top end a little bit due to the lack of power, but it does have some really good tunability. You can actually drive this thing on road as well, and it does pretty well. So definitely a very versatile. Okay, so now moving on to the 1960s, we start here with the Jaguar E-Type. Now this thing had plenty of power, 264 brake horsepower, relatively lightweight, but was really ahead of its time. Things really fast, being able to do nearly 150 miles an hour, and this is back in 1961. As you can see with the livery we got, this thing was used quite a lot in racing and was very successful. And this posed a kind of, and this car was a main rival for Ferrari and Lamborghini and many other supercar manufacturers at the time. And so Ferrari saying himself this is the most beautiful car he'd ever seen. And I mean, it's clear to see why. So for this, many of the cars either had these massive engines but were really kind of inefficient with the engines they had, all had very small engines, but were very small cars. But the idea of having kind of a bigger engine, but also being very powerful, wasn't really done up until this point, up until obviously the Jaguar E-Type came along. I mean, the sound in this thing's incredible. And I'm sure everyone can tell this is a lot faster than some of the other cars that you've seen previously. It's a relatively cheap car as well, and Gran Turismo 7 is definitely a car that I'd recommend getting it. Now we go to the 1970s. Now I mentioned about what Britain was doing before them, but the Americans were also busy with their idea of the muscle car. This is quite interesting. So in Europe people had kind of a mini hatchback, or maybe they went and bought something different. But in America, the idea was, let's put a big V8 in the front of the car, delivering power to the rear wheels, and then we can just make the cars as big as possible to fit everyone in, really. And I think muscle cars have been well represented in Gran Turismo over the years, to be fair, even in Gran Turismo 7. But let's not lie now, the most memorable of these muscle cars is the Plymouth Superbird. Got a really long nose, really massive car, massive spoiler, 425 brake horsepower, a 7-litre V8 in this thing, and it's just insane, really. I mean, it was able to, first car to do over 200 miles an hour in NASCAR, technically a race car, but still counts. And it's a base of the King in the Cars 2 video, which I've done before. Driving the Mini and then going straight to this is really very contrasting, really. And trying to drive this around small tracks like the Cooper is quite a difficult task, to be fair, and it doesn't handle very well, as you can see. It's really fun to drive, actually. I do really like this car. It's not too bad at under 500,000 credits, so it's a nice classic muscle car to add to your collection, and definitely it encapsulates this kind of muscle car idea that America had during this time. And actually, when you think about it, it's not too dissimilar from the Mercedes-Benz and the cars from the 20s and 30s. Massive engines, not very efficient with the engines, but in terms of absolute horsepower, it was very powerful. Really heavy, really big cars. Okay, so the second car representing the 1970s will be this Porsche 911 Carrera RS from 1973. Now, this wasn't actually the first 911, the first one I think came out in around 1964. This is the first time they thought about actually adding a significant amount of power to it, rather than just being kind of an everyday sort of car. So though the 1973 one here wasn't the original, it still was a historic step in the kind of transformation of the Porsche 911, and specifically, and overall the car, just kind of neating that about. Now, another thing you notice is that this car is a little bit of a handful to drive. The engine at the back really does kind of challenge your driver a little bit, but it does make it a very fun car to drive, I will admit that. Slides around quite a lot, as you'd expect, but it does carry a lot of speed through the corners, especially for a car of its time, to be fair. I mean, you saw the Jaguar E-Type, which had even more power than this thing, but round the corners it wouldn't really be able to keep up. And still on the straights it is pretty fast. Well, for a car of 200 horsepower it does accelerate and have good top speed, to be fair, more than what you'd expect. Bit of grip at this high speed sector here. And down this straight I was able to get to speeds of nearly 140, and I think this thing can do nearly 150 max out. And for a car with just 200 horsepower, I think 150 miles an hour top speed isn't really too bad. Definitely a good car to have, and one that you should drive as well. Now moving on to the 1980s. Now this period is known for its kind of futuristic looking cars, with the interior and the exterior. First we're going to go back to Germany, because they had another really good idea. So they took the plain Volkswagen Golf, and then they upgraded it and called it the Golf GTI, and this marks the beginning of the hot hatch. So 110 horsepower may not sound like much, but a 1.8 litre front engine front wheel drive, so it's nothing too special. But at under 900 kg it certainly was fast through the corner. It's really cheap as well, being around 50,000 credits. And I think it is the evolution of the Mini Cooper, but they did take it up a notch, so Volkswagen Golf is probably one of the most, or is the people's car really. And there have been lots of manufacturers that have tried to copy this formula. You know, some have done really well, to be fair, but this car was the beginning of the hot hatch. Everything else kind of came after this. So I mean, there's lots of upgrades you can do to this car. You can even swap in an Audi Quattro engine if you want. But I think it's just a nice car just to drive without any upgrades really. It's not going to blow you away with its immense power, but it's just a nice fun car to drive really. So now we have the Mazda MX-5, and this is the best-selling sports car of all time. The idea of this car was just to simply be fun. I mean, as you can see, it's nothing special in terms of power-wise. Handles okay, but a little bit of body roll. Brakes are okay, it does slide around a little bit, but you could also use this thing for drifting. Quite a versatile car, really great tunability as well with this thing. But I mean, yeah, this thing was built for fun, really. That's all it was designed for. And it's really cheap as well, you know, perfect beginner car in real life and in Gran Turismo and many other racing games for that matter. Definitely a fun car to drive in the game because it slides around a lot. I was able to get nearly 100 up this hill, so nothing special, but I mean, you know, it's not too bad, I guess. Did have quite a lot of grip through this sector at the high speed. I wasn't expecting that. And this one, as you can see here, is a convertible. We do have many generations of the Mazda MX-5 in the game you can choose from. This is the original from 1989. If it was first generation, kind of most appropriate, really. I mean, it'll do around 130 miles an hour with just over 100 horsepower. So I mean, that once again, that's not too bad, to be fair. Yeah, definitely a significant car in the evolution of the car, really. Now moving on to the 1990s, and this was the era of the supercar. There are many cars from this period that stand out: Jaguar XJ20, those from the 80s, but technically the Porsche 959. But I think the two that we'll be talking about is the Ferrari F40 and the McLaren F1. So let's start with this Ferrari F40 here. First thing you know is this thing is incredibly fast. I mean, you know, so much faster than anything we talked about previously. I don't know what Polyphony has done. This is probably one of, if not the best handling car I've ever driven in this game. For car with sports tyres, it is really amazing. Carries a lot of speed through the corners, a little bit of understeer, but it's not too bad. Very stable, very stable. I have a lot of trust in this car, and that's why I'm able to go quite fast around this track. But I mean, on the straights is even more insane. Once the turbo kicks in, 80 miles an hour in gear 2, nearly 90 miles an hour in gear 2 there. You know, I mentioned with the MX-5 getting to around 100, well, we're already at 140 miles an hour at this point. Handles really good, you can see, no faults there whatsoever. And the sound that this thing makes is insane. Really lightweight as well. You can see this thing is really moving at 150, pretty much 160 miles an hour. 165 there. Brakes are fantastic, as you'd expect. And it's not even, this car hasn't even got a massive engine. It's got like 2.8 litre V8 and obviously twin turbo. There's no V12s, no 6 litres or any of that stuff. Just simply a car built for the track, and it's very good at it. Fantastic car there. And the second car, as we've previously established, is the McLaren F1. Now this thing's even more insane than the Ferrari F40. This can do, instead of 200 miles an hour, 240 miles an hour. And as you can see, it's so fast throughout the track here. It's still one of the fastest cars we have in the game, even considering it's like 30 years old now. Now the speed through the corners, once again, is just simply insane. And the mid-engine rear-wheel drive layout does keep it planted to the floor. It's quite a small car actually in comparison to the Plymouth Superbird that we talked about a little while ago. This certainly does pack a punch now on the straights here, so let's see what it can do. So you look at it flying through here. The brakes in this thing are insane. It's a really good track car as well as being a car, obviously really fast on the straights. And carrying a lot of speed through these high speed corners here, definitely the fastest car we've discussed yet. You can see why it's worth so much. For those that don't know, it's worth 20 million in maximum amount in the game. Because it's so exclusive and there's so many unique things about this car. I mean, you can discuss the kind of central driving position, as you can see on screen, the gold that's in the back for whatever reason, and so many other things, and the fact there's only a limited number produced makes this car such a significant. I would advise you to get this car, but I think for the average player it's not really achievable, but you've got to understand how good this car is, really. So now moving on to the 2000s. Now in my opinion, I don't think the 2000s were a really great era for the car. I mean, we had the kind of fantastic supercars of the 90s and just more in the 2010s which to talk about, but the 2000s wasn't really much going on there. I'd love to include the Bugatti Veyron, but unfortunately that isn't in the game for the 2000s anyway. But I think the 2000s are really good at these kind of super saloons, so putting in big engines, powerful engines into kind of everyday cars and making it go really fast. the Evo you can see on screen, a fantastic example of that. 2 litre but quite a big turbo, and it's actually really fast. I mean, you wouldn't really expect it for a car this cheap, this not even very special, but it's a very good car. A lot of body rolls you can see, but the acceleration on this thing is fantastic. Obviously that 4-wheel drive makes it get off the line so fast. And it does actually carry a lot of speed through the corners, more than what you'd expect for a car being quite this heavy. Sounds really good as well. I mean, once again, you can go to the Super Impressor as well, and there's lots of different variants of this car, the Impressor and many other saloons for that matter. So it's not this is a definitive Evo, but it's just one I picked out. Struggling a little bit with power at the top end there, kind of gets around 120, but these cars are mainly built for acceleration, and that is why they can be used on the road as well, as you can see here. Very versatile car, the tuning potential on these things is amazing. But as you can see here, we're getting to around 145 in gear 6, and it's actually still going. I didn't think it'd be that good at the top end. You can see braking here, bit of body roll, little slide onto the grass, able to correct it really easily back on the mat, accelerates so fast. Now in the 2010s, that was all about the hybridness and the kind of shift to electric. And what better way to start than with the Holy Trinity in 2013 or 2012. So of course the McLaren P1, the Porsche 918 and the Ferrari LaFerrari. We have all 3 of these in the game thankfully, and they are really good cars. All of these having kind of turbocharged engines or naturally aspirated engines, really powerful, but then combined with these electric motors, and some of these made 900, nearly 1,000 horsepower. I think the most memorable of the 3 is the Ferrari LaFerrari. Now this thing's insane. 950 horsepower, top speed of 220 miles an hour, really fast off the line, really well handling car. Any track thing you need it to do, it can do. I mean, the other 2 cars are great. The McLaren's great and the Porsche's great. I mean, compared to the other 2, I think the Porsche is slightly lacking a bit. But I mean, they're all 3 fantastic cars, but if I could only choose one, it would be the LaFerrari. And this car definitely, with the other 2, caused a shift from other manufacturers to start looking into hybrid technology. But since we're talking about the 2010s, we've got to mention the Bugatti Chiron, of course. It's one of the most insane cars of the period. So 8 litre W16 quad turbo like the Bugatti Veyron, but this thing has nearly 1,500 horsepower. It can do around 276 miles an hour in the game as standard, but easily over 300 miles an hour tuning. So this car really is a beast around the track. This car really is a beast on the straights. Its weight basically 2 tons, and it's quite a large car. It isn't the best round the track, but it's so certainly very fast. But I think if the older cars from like the 20s and 30s are reimagined today, the Chiron is what they'd be. A massive engine, really luxurious, not really caring too much about speed through the corners or how light it is, but really reserved for the elite of the elites, and I think the Chiron does encapsulate that very well. And I mean, just listen to this sound. At the front of this change was Tesla, and in the game we have this Tesla Model 3 from 2023. So 531 horsepower, but the acceleration in this thing is just simply insane. But it can keep up with pretty much any supercar, even with like twice as much horsepower. I mean, it's a really revolutionary car. I mean, you can't see all of this in the game, but it's definitely an interesting car to drive. Things like no pitting for fuel or whatever, and tyre wear is very much affected as well, so it's a lot different to drive.